Hey guys, it's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Good to have you with us today. Busy show for us. We'll get a preview of Auburn later on when we welcome in Stan White, former Auburn quarterback and current color analyst for the Auburn radio broadcast. That's a lot of fun. David Green here as well. One of the things I'm looking forward to speaking to David about today is a great look back to that terrific moment in 2002 when David Green's touchdown pass to Michael Johnson won the East for Georgia for the very first time. We'll do that. And, of course, we'll remember what made last year's SEC championship for Georgia against Auburn so special with a look back to what Gus Malzahn said at the end of the game in November that Dog fans did not like. We're a very busy show today, and we're glad you're with us as DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, begins right now.
From DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
All right, I want to start the show with a quick story here, and we featured this week on our DN90, which is a 90-second video we do every single day, taking you around the news of a Dog Nation. And one of the things we talked about on one of those episodes here this week were some very interesting comments from Georgia safety J.R. Reed. Now, what Reed said was not about Auburn, but I'm going to kind of circle it all back and make it be about Auburn before we're all said and done here. J.R. Reed was talking about the way that the defense gets motivated each week. One of the things that he points out is a lot of times the coaching staff will use those extracurricular stuff out there. Hey, did you hear what so-and-so said about you? So-and-so thinks you're not any good. So-and-so kind of doubts who you are as a player. And the coaching staff, a lot of time it's maybe strength and conditioning coaches, they kind of poke and prod the Georgia players with some of that kind of stuff. And for J.R. Reed in particular, apparently this is a pretty significant source of motivation. He told us that post-game on Saturday, and we featured this for you on DN90 this week. Here's J.R. Reed.
Something we feed off of, and usually with a lot of teams, when they talk trash or naysay about us, we kind of go out there and slap them in the face and prove them wrong.
I mean, listen, Georgia fans love the idea of Georgia going out there slapping folks in the face and proving doubters, naysayers, and critics wrong. And in one particular case in the Kentucky game, apparently that was a pretty significant thing for J.R. Reed. You know, I guess you may remember, and we've talked about this from time to time, that Paul Feinbaum at one point in time on Twitter, the SEC Network host, made a comparison between Kentucky running back Benny Snell and Herschel Walker. Now, most Georgia fans thought that comparison was just ludicrous on its face, and yet if you're a Georgia player, all of a sudden that can also become kind of a weird sense of motivation of, hold on, Feinbaum says the guy on the Kentucky field is as good as Herschel Walker. Even if the Georgia players don't remember Herschel Walker as a player because they're too young to have seen him play, a lot of them want to go out there and obviously prove that's not true, that that's not right. And J.R. Reed said, yeah, you know what? We did want to do that on Saturday. Here's more from J.R. Reed.
Coach would definitely bring it up and point out to us. We understood that everyone thought Benny Snell was maybe the next Herschel Walker or something like that. So we wanted to go out there and prove that there's only one Herschel.
I mean, listen, my thought on this is whatever works is great. Seasons can be long, and, focus can wane over the course of time. So if little things like that just keep the intensity up from week to week, who might have say that's a bad thing? Plus, as an old-timer myself, I do take great appreciation in knowing that the current crop of Georgia players, young bucks that they are, have great reverence and respect for Herschel Walker. They don't want anybody putting his name in their mouths if they're not, doing it with the utmost respect. And comparing Herschel Walker to Benny Snell is not the most respectful way to speak about Herschel Walker. So that's all good. That's all kind of cool. It is worth pointing out, though, that Kirby Smart was asked about this kind of stuff this week. Players saying, hey, coaches are always letting us know all the stuff that's out there. They're always feeding us this potential bulletin board material. And Kirby Smart, as you might have guessed, is saying, that may be what some of our guys do, but that's not necessarily top of mind for me. Here's Kirby Smart on that.
I don't really think I think the players get into it. I think they like to look at it. They like to see it, and they use it as motivation. I think strength coaches sometimes use it as motivation, but I'm a big intrinsic motivation person. I think you've got to do it from within. You got to do it because it's the right thing to do. You got to do it because you want to do it for your teammates. Because what happens when you play good and they don't say that and you have no motivation? You're always looking for the naysayers. I don't think that's big. I mean, obviously, if those kids said that, they may think it's important to them. And I think we had a great challenge last week, and we issued a challenge to them because the challenge was, here's a team who's running the ball really well. Here's a running back who's running the ball really well. You have an opportunity to go out and make a name or make a mark for yourself. But I don't think it's really about what other people say.
So now we get to the point of why I bring all of this up off the top of the program to begin with. First of all, I think that's exactly the way the program's supposed to operate. Kirby Smart is supposed to be somewhat senatorial here, and above all of this, it's beneath him, beneath his dignity to be going around showing Georgia players what Paul Feinbaum said about Herschel Walker. That's the way I want my head coach to act, but that's not necessarily the way I want my assistant coaches to act. I do want a good cop, bad cop thing here. I want the one guy who's above the fray and the other guy who's always stirring the pot. I just think that overall works really well. And when you think about how that could work against Kentucky, seemed to work out pretty well, it's also a different way that may work out against Auburn on this particular Saturday. Because, as many Georgia fans remember, and hopefully Georgia players remember, and maybe there's a job of a Georgia assistant coach this week to do some work making sure it's remembered, Gus Malzahn, after Auburn, to its credit, beat Georgia a year ago there in Jordan-Hare Stadium. Malzahn was feeling pretty good about himself in the immediate aftermath of that game. Didn't mean to get captured on audio, but as he was celebrating on the field there after Georgia lost to Auburn and lost in pretty significant fashion, well, Malzahn said some words then that have not been forgotten by anybody around here right now. Let me take you back in time to last November, and maybe this week the Georgia players are reminded of this.
We whipped the dog crap out of them.
Not easy to hear what Malzahn says there, and yet I think by now you probably know what it is that Malzahn did say. He says, we whipped the dog crap out of them. And listen, you talk about, beneath the dignity of a head coach. That's certainly an example of that from Malzahn a year ago. And we know that worked for Georgia in the SEC championship game. Georgia won the game 28-7. We turned that around here into a DawgNation retaliation. It became one of our most popular T-shirts. One of our happiest tailgates was that day outside of Mercedes-Benz Stadium leading into that with all of that. It was fun for us a year ago. But here's what I'm going to suggest here off the top of our program. That well is not dry yet. That Georgia could have used that for motivation, and guys like Isaac Nada admitted, yeah, you know what? Malzahn's dog crap comments were a big deal to us. Georgia may have used that as motivation a year ago. Well, guess what? I think you can go right back to that well again here for a 2018 and use it all again. And ultimately what Kirby Smart says is probably true of intrinsic motivation is better than something that's extrinsic, something that comes from outside the program because you can't always depend on that being there. That's probably true, but it doesn't mean you don't use what you have at your disposal, and this is what Georgia has at its disposal. So I hope that Georgia does use that this week. And I think what Malzahn said a year ago about beating the dog crap out of Georgia and how happy he was at the time, I think it also paints a picture of how significant this rivalry is for him. Remember, this is a guy that has signed a big-time extension. And at one point in time, he looked like the top threat to Nick Saban and all the SEC. After all, Malzahn won this league in 2013, and winning that game, he was on top of the SEC West. And yet Kirby comes back and beats him again. He's now, 2-1 as a head coach in his time against Gus Malzahn, looking to go 3 for 4 with a win here in 2018 if he can indeed get that done. Malzahn knows that as Kirby Smart, a less experienced coach, passes him up the ranks of these coaching ranking lists that come out during the offseason. He knows that that's tough on his reputation, and it's tough for him to keep a pretty restless fan base at bay here. So this battle between Malzahn and Kirby on Saturday night, I think is pretty fascinating here because I think Malzahn knows he's got a lot at stake. And I think that Georgia fans know that Malzahn's own words can be used against him here. And I would imagine there's some Georgia coaches probably reminding some players this week of how much of a rivalry the other side views this to be. And I no doubt am sure that the Georgia players will respond pretty well to that challenge. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Hello to you, and thank you for being with us, no matter how you get to us today. Live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter feed, radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rev, or in podcast form, wherever podcasts can be found, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. We're really glad you were with us and really appreciate Marco's Pizza making it all possible. By now, you know how much we love Marco's around here, and we like them for two very simple reasons. It's authentic Italian quality pizza. I mean, the Gianmarco family recipe in the sauce, the 3 cheeses blended and melted together on top of that terrific crust. And it's also available at a great price. How about this? 2 medium, 2 topping pizzas for just $6.99 each. So if you want to satisfy a picky family The sister likes one thing, the brother likes something else, the mama likes one thing, the daddy likes something else. Listen, you can make everybody happy with 2 medium, 2-topping pizzas for $6.99 each, and it's not going to hurt your wallet too bad either. So go to Marcos.com to find the Marcos closest to you. We're very busy on today's show. Coming up a little bit later on, we're going to talk to the former Auburn quarterback and current radio color analyst, Stan White. He'll give us a little more insight into what's going on at Auburn this week and just how important this game is from an Auburn standpoint heading towards this rivalry game on Saturday. That'll be fun with a great voice in college football, Stan White, coming up a little later on. It's also our buddy David Green. We'll check in with him in a couple of minutes here too. So we are loaded and busy here on this program. Before any of that, though, there is something kind of interesting going on here when it comes to a Georgia player cleared from injury. I think this is pretty fascinating here. Davad Wilson, who you may remember is one of the top signees for Georgia in its 2018 class. The class was number 1 in the country. Wilson's addition was one of the reasons why, and yet Wilson goes down with injury during spring practice. Kind of a devastating moment here for Wilson in his freshman season. But, hey, let's get excited here for a moment, at least based on Wilson's social media stuff. It sounds like he's really excited about some news that he's gotten from the doctor as of late. Let me show you a couple things from Davad Wilson here on Twitter to give you an idea of where his mindset is just a few months after an injury that he suffered during spring practice. Davad Wilson says, "Thank you, Lord, 100, or I guess 100, as the kids like to say. Watch over me, Granda." And so exciting stuff there from Davad Wilson. He also goes on to praise the Georgia Strength and Conditioning Program, saying, "Hands down, we got the best weight room staff in the country. It's not up for debate." That is Davad Wilson obviously feeling pretty good about apparently being cleared to play here. However, as coaches have a tendency to do, Kirby Smart, when he spoke to reporters this week, kind of pumped the brakes on some of that for Davad Wilson. Wilson is cleared to play, but maybe don't read too much into exactly what that means. Here's Kirby Smart.
He's cleared to play. I mean, he's going to play. He's got a lot to learn. I mean, he's smart, he's bright, he's a good football player, but it's not that easy. You don't just take however long that's been for him off. So we're trying to kind of develop him and get him in a position that he could play. So he's repping at star. He's working with the twos. He's taking a lot of reps. And the sooner he learns it and he's able to play, then hopefully he'll get in that competition and mix it up.
As a little context here for how players' social media messages can be different from their head coach when it comes to injury. Remember, it was just last week that Ben Cleveland was talking about stone cold stunning some Kentucky defenders, and yet Kirby Smart said he may not be quite as healthy as he thinks he is yet. Maybe the same thing is true for Davad Wilson here also. However, around here at DawgNation Daily, we do like to save receipts. And while Kirby Smart is kind of now downplaying the role that Davad Wilson could play in the remainder of the 2018 season, it wasn't all of that long ago that Smart was singing a bit of a different tune about Davad Wilson, because I think a lot of us assume when you have a serious injury the way that Wilson did during spring practice, that's a complete write-off for the freshman season of 2018. But Smart at the time said not so fast. Smart at the time struck an optimistic tone, both in terms of Wilson's ability to recover and what he was doing on the field before he got hurt. So Kirby kind of now pumping the brakes on this a little bit, but he was all gas, no brakes, not all that long ago, just a few months ago back in the spring. Here's Kirby, what he said then on Davad Wilson.
I mean, that's a tough injury because he was a kid that was really coming on for us, and we still think he's going to be able to play next year. It's not a matter of being out. There's a lot of guys that come back from that and are able to play, and he's a bright kid. He's a really hard-working kid. We think he'll heal fast, and I mean, if he's at Zamir's pace, we should be able to hopefully get him back.
So hopefully getting him back, recovering in a nice pace here, and a guy that, as Kirby Smart said a few times during spring practice, was performing very well before he got hurt. So I don't want to make too much of this because obviously none of us know how this is exactly going to play out, but it is a little bit fascinating to think that much like in professional sports where you have the trade deadline and you make acquisitions there at the right before the trade deadline here, well, Georgia's going into its stretch run of the 2018 season. To think it's getting another capable defensive back, maybe it doesn't show up a lot against Auburn. Maybe it's UMass and Georgia Tech heading towards Alabama in the SEC championship game. That'll be just fine with a lot of Georgia fans as well. This is a pretty fascinating thing to think about, that an elite recruit who was practicing well before he got hurt, who Kirby Smart at the time said, you know what, his recovery may put him on schedule to still play here in 2018, and that may be playing out the way that we thought it was going to. This could be big news for Georgia as it gets ready to put together a stretch run. I have always said that for Georgia, who, if you want to look at the performance in September and October, the performance needed to improve. Well, better performance is always brought about by better personnel. We're starting to see some new personnel sprinkled in, especially here on the Georgia defense, where freshman linebackers played a lot, where Jordan Davis has emerged as a quality defensive lineman. And maybe now another addition to that defensive back fray, maybe as a potential star, that extra fifth defensive back. Divad Wilson could be a big addition for Georgia's defense here. I think that's pretty fascinating stuff. All right, before we talk to David Green, let me also remind you that our friends at Kroger got a big event going on right now. It's a wine sale at your local Atlanta Kroger. It's 5 days only. It's now through November the 11th. You can save 10% when you purchase 6 bottles of wine with your Kroger Plus card. So check out your local Atlanta Kroger for more on that. And, of course, it's always great to have Kroger part of what we're doing here at DawgNation Daily here as well. All right, it is Stan White coming up in just a couple of minutes. We'll talk to the former Auburn quarterback. Get a lot of good stuff from him previewing the game on Saturday from the enemy perspective, if you will. But for now, it's our good buddy, David Green, the former Georgia quarterback. A lot to talk to with David. And, of course, it's great to have you with us here on DawgNation Daily as well. And we'll get David Green coming up here in just a moment. And as my computer has a tendency to always do, somewhere around the 15-minute mark of every show, it also freezes up here. So we'll get David. We'll have a lot of your comments later on. I think you'll enjoy Stan White today. There's obviously a lot going on with the Auburn program at the moment, and so Stan will tell us a lot about that. We'll look at all the other top SEC games of the weekend as well. It's kind of an interesting crop of SEC games here this weekend, so that should be a lot of fun to think about. We'll do a lot of that coming up later on in the program. There's also an injury to a Florida quarterback that could be pretty interesting to deal with here as well. So we'll do a lot of that, and we'll be really good and fun on today's program. So we'll get David in a moment here. Let me take a couple comments before we get to David on that front. I'll pull up the Facebook comments and the YouTube comments, and of course, it's great to have you with us on the program here today. I'm excited about the potential of Divad Wilson making an impact for Georgia. I think that could be a lot of fun. I also love the idea of maybe Georgia going back and ringing the bell from a year ago and referencing those dog crap comments a little bit. I think that could be a really fun thing here, too. All right, let me get some comments here. Actually, we got David ready to go. All right, we'll get comments later on. We'll preview the SEC games later on. We'll talk to Stan White. So it's a busy program. It includes you. We're glad you're here, but also great to have David Green with us, too. And so let me say hello to the former Georgia quarterback, David Green, a great guest when he's able to join us here each week on DawgNation Daily. Always a lot of fun. There's also a big event coming up at Tailgate Apparel, downtown Athens, this Saturday before the Georgia game against Auburn. David will tell us about that coming up in just a minute, too. David, thanks for taking some time to be with us today. How are you?
Doing good, Brandon. How about yourself?
I'm doing really well, and I want to talk to you about one of the great moments in the history of the Georgia-Auburn rivalry. Obviously, I love walking down memory lane when we have you on the program. Before we get to that, though, let me stay in the here and now at least for a moment. I thought that Georgia got, pound for pound, maybe its most impressive win of the season on Saturday against Kentucky. Clearly, if you want to put that in concert with what the team did a week ago against Florida, it seems to be playing its best football right now. Now, it probably also needs to get better as it heads towards Alabama in December. But I would imagine, as a guy that watches these games pretty closely, you had to be pretty impressed with what you saw from Georgia on the road, winning the division at Kentucky, a program that wanted that game desperately, but Georgia just wouldn't let them have it. I would imagine you had to be impressed with what you saw.
Well, I'm very impressed. And, Brandon, one thing we probably tend to forget about a good bit is just how young we are as a football team. I'm not going to lie, that game last week concerned me. Kentucky had a lot of seniors. They were a team that believed they were come from behind a lot of victories, and it was an away game. And look, I know, we say, well, it's Kentucky. It was a good football team, and they're used to playing smash mouth football and winning with that style. Kentucky was, and I tell you what, the way our guys came out, our running backs are unbelievable to begin with. I'm not telling anything you don't know, and the Dog Nation doesn't already know, as well as just how good the backs are, but how good we played up front. Typically when you already got a young offensive line and a guy goes down, that's really trouble. And our backups, are good enough to be starters on just about all the other teams in the SEC as well. So, one thing, Kirby's obviously doing a great job recruiting. We got a lot of depth. We got guys that are playing hard, apparently, from, listening to some of the post-game conference as well as even these backups. I mean, these guys are competing hard, and You can tell this. It hadn't been easy this year. I mean, we've had moments going in like right there for halftime where we're putting together a great drive, then we fumbled, just the quarterback and running back exchange. We're not making it easy for us, but one thing's for sure, these kids keep playing hard.
And just to follow up on that, you talk about how young Georgia is in some key spots, and yet one of the things that Kirby Smart's also said is that when you throw guys into an environment, adversity kind of brings out leadership. I would think it also kind of hastens the experience factor here as well. And I'm guessing as a guy that also played, a lot early in your Georgia career too, that all of a sudden experience can kind of compound on itself pretty quickly when you're in big games, in big moments like that. It probably happened for you back as a redshirt freshman in 2001, and for a lot of these true freshmen kind of thrust into action here this year. All of a sudden, these big games are growing them up pretty fast, right?
There's no question about it. Yeah, and because it feels different. I mean, I tell you, the first game I played in was Arkansas State, and had some success. And I'm out in that game. I'm going, man, this thing's not too bad. Pretty easy. Very next week we play an SEC game in South Carolina. I'm going, man, those holes were wide open last week. These guys aren't open anymore. And the speed of the game, I don't have time to step and throw. And it's got a totally different feel especially when you get into those big games. It feels different. What's great is when you got guys that step up and make plays in those big games, and you start to, we kept talking about identity these last few weeks. Start forming an identity, and it's good to see some guys like Holloman that are stepping up and becoming some of those go-to guys.
When you were on, you were always very good to let me kind of walk back down memory lane, because when I think about Georgia-Auburn on Saturday, I think about some of the great moments in this rivalry from a Georgia perspective, and obviously you were involved in one of the biggest in 2002, the very first time that Georgia had ever won the division, and it comes in thrilling fashion on your fourth quarter, fourth down, touchdown throw to Michael Johnson there. I guess X57 takeoff? I always get the play call slightly wrong.
It was 70X takeoff.
Yeah, there you go. But it's an unbelievable, moment, and I would imagine, much like the hobnail boot and some of the other stuff that you had the great privilege of being involved with, I got to imagine it's a pretty nice thing for you to think about from your own perspective. But what are your memories of that, and how big of a moment that was? And when you're facing such a pressure-packed situation like that, touchdown on fourth down in the fourth quarter on the road with, a division on the line, how do you process all of that at once? What was that moment like for you, David?
Well, it was crazy. I will say this. Well, I think what we did at the time, and the way to keep your nerves down is, when you hear coaches talk about, just the process, and the way that, I used to always try to play is just one play at a time, regardless if I threw a touchdown or an interception. The play's over, learn from it, turn the page. And so you're not really I never would allow myself to zoom out like a fan where you're constantly kind of analyzing the flow of the game as you're watching it. As a player, I was very almost robotic in the way that I played. It was just the next play, and you just got to keep grinding. And that game against Auburn, and the team a little bit was very similar to this team in the fact that we didn't make it easy on ourselves. Offensively, we played terrible the first half. We were just getting whipped. Second half, defense plays unbelievable. We come alive offensively. We had some moments late in the game that we didn't really capitalize and make the play, but we kept pounding. We kept grinding. And when you talk about Kirby and he's talking about this team, how they don't let up, they just keep playing. That's all we really did that day. I mean, we had moments we probably should have won the game early, but we didn't. But we kept getting after it, and we kept believing, and finally made it happen. So, those are the keys. That's how you get from getting real nervous, is you don't allow yourself to zoom out, think about the big picture. Sometimes you just got to get in there and compete and stay in the moment.
I think it's a really interesting perspective, because I will tell you, as a fan, it's almost the exact opposite thing. I was lucky enough to be in the stadium there that day, and as you said, Georgia gets off to a slow start. Y'all were down 14-0, if memory serves, and the way I'm processing this as a fan is, growing up, I'm too young to have seen Herschel Walker play, but I'd seen Georgia have some good seasons. Only 2 losses in 1997. Only 2 losses in 1992. I'd seen some good seasons, and I had hopes that the 2002 season might be even better than that. But when it looked like y'all were going to lose to Auburn, as a fan, I started resolving myself back to the idea of, well, I guess this is just going to be another good but not great season. And then the fourth quarter happens.
Right.
Musa Smith has a great run to set up the throw that ultimately you made to a Michael Johnson there, and it all changes on a dime. So it's kind of funny how, as a fan, I'm processing this totally different than you are as a player, because I am analyzing every single snap and every single play and what the historical significance of a loss would be, and obviously when it turns to a win. So it is very different how we process these moments, David.
Well, and Brandon, that's the way I do it now too. I mean, look, and I'm not gonna lie, I get a lot more nervous watching games now than I ever did when I played, because my mindset was totally different as a fan now.
Yeah.
I sit there and at halftime I'm going, what are we doing? I analyze the flow of the game and how things are going. But as a player, you can't do that. You have to literally be in the moment. You just got to keep playing. And look, there's going to be days that you wake up and you don't have your best, and you still got to go out there and grind away and make it happen. I think a lot of folks can understand that, especially people who like play golf or tennis. There's days that you're better than other days. You just don't have the feel or the touch that day. Same thing at quarterback. You just got to go out there and grind and just and kind of grind and scrap your way to a W.
All right, fun autograph signing coming up at Tailgate Apparel on Saturday. I want to hear about that. But before we do, let me talk to you about this game on Saturday against Auburn for a brief moment here. First of all, from the rivalry standpoint, we know the atmosphere is going to be intense. It was intense last year in Auburn. It's going to be intense in Athens this week. As a guy that has played in this series and watched these games closely as a fan now, what does the Auburn rivalry mean to you, David?
Well, I kind of look at Auburn. It's kind of like a brother-sister type school. I mean, my whole family grew up as Auburn fans. My brother-in-law kicked for them, and it's a team, it's a program I think is very similar to us. I mean, they're typically always really good. They're always they're winning, championships at a lot of different sports. But it's one of those games where you can always, count on getting their best shot. Year in, year out, they're phenomenal. I mean, last year the way they were playing at this time, I'm glad we don't have to play that team again. But it's a team I got a lot of respect for. Always have. You better show up ready to play if you want to win. And it's one of those games that you need to win if you want to have. If you're looking at playoff implications, I mean, you don't want to be losing late in the year. In fact, this is a time where you really got to start stepping it up and playing your best ball if you want to try to make a run at a championship.
And I think on Saturday, it sounds like you're expecting the same thing I am, which is, even though Georgia's a pretty big favorite here, like a 14.5-point favorite, the truth is I think that Auburn has a chance to come in and challenge Georgia. Now, it's a game that I ultimately think that Georgia wins here, but it sounds like you're on guard for Georgia to have its chin strap buckled and be ready to go, because defensively this team is still pretty packed with talent here, and obviously they're motivated, and it comes at a good time for Georgia in terms of another benchmark to cross heading towards the SEC championship game. It sounds like you kind of see it the same way.
Well, I think if we're just worried about trying to get a win, we're kind of short-sighting ourselves a little bit. I mean, I think we need to continue to work to get better. We got a long way to go with the talent that we have on the field. I think we're trying to still kind of work out our identity offensively. We're trying to improve there. We got to get to hitting on all cylinders, which we haven't been able to do yet. We're improving, which is good. We got a good young football team that's working hard, but we got a long way to go. Before we play that championship game against Alabama, and hopefully, these kids got bigger, aspirations of that being in the playoff, hopefully. And if that's really their goal, I mean, we're going to have to take our game to the next level. So hopefully their concentration is on that and just trying to make sure that we improve as a team. So
that's what the players and coaches will be thinking about, but fans are thinking about also what they're going to be doing before the game in Athens on Saturday. That's where Tailgate Apparel comes in. Tailgate Apparel, 279 East Broad Street, right there in downtown Athens. It's the old Harry Biscuits building, and this is a great time of year to be at Tailgate Apparel any day of the week, because when you're thinking about filling in that Christmas list for that tough-to-buy-for person in your life, Tailgate Apparel, especially if there's a Georgia fan, that's a great place to check off a lot of your Christmas buying list here. You can do a lot of that at Tailgate Apparel as we head towards the month of November. But, David, this Saturday in particular at Tailgate is going to be a great day, because I know the former Georgia punter Drew Butler, who is a terrific analyst of college football, a guy that knows the sport, knows this current team really well. Not only is he going to be there signing autographs, but also hanging out, talking football with the folks. Drew is a great guy, a great personality here, and what a terrific guest that is for a Tailgate Apparel before the game on Saturday.
Yeah, no, I'll tell you, we're excited. Anybody that knows Drew, he's got a terrific personality. Like you said, he follows the Dogs closely, and terrific analyst. So the Dog fans are certainly in for a treat with Drew. One of Ray Guy Award, played 3, 4, 5 years in the NFL as well. Big Dog fan, and excited about the game just like everybody else. So he'll be out there from 12 to 2 on Saturday, signing away. So if you're coming up to Athens, certainly stop by. I know Drew would love to see you.
It's 279 East Broad Street, downtown Athens, the old Harry Bissett's building. It is Tailgate Apparel. David, thanks for talking to us about the great Georgia-Auburn memories of the past and the big game coming up on Saturday. It's always a pleasure to have you on the program. We'll look forward to speaking to you soon.
All right, Brandon. Appreciate it, buddy.
Really good stuff there from David Green. I want to react to something that David had to say there a moment ago. I thought this was really good. Before that, though, let me remind you that around here, as I say from time to time, for us, it's more about Georgia on the field. It's also about Georgia in the classroom and the impact the University of Georgia is having around the world. For instance, let me give you a perfect example of that. Did you know that the national graduation rate for student veterans is only about 50% nationwide? But UGA is doing its work to change that. From a myriad of responsive services to veteran-focused scholarships and persistent coaching programs, UGA proudly supports our nation's student veterans. We've created numerous ways for the men and women serving in our country to get the education they rightfully deserve. And boy, what a noble cause that is. And through the Student Veterans Resource Center Scholarship Fund, we provide vital scholarship support for student veterans to ensure the financial hardships do not prevent them from earning their degrees. And with the assistance of the Student Veterans Association, we built a network of support for those serving, keeping them informed of available scholarships and networking events. So here's how you can help. You can support UGA student veterans today with a financial gift or support. You can simply go to this website. It's give.uga.edu. And I want to add one more thing to it. give.uga.edu, then /veterans-support. Check out veteran support there at give.uga.edu, and you can really step up and help out in a great cause. The university that you love, doing some great work for the men and women who keep us safe here. What an incredible, incredible opportunity that is to be a part of, and we appreciate the UGA Alumni Association letting us know about what's going on there in that regard. All right, really quickly here before we move on, I thought that David Green made a really interesting point a moment ago. He said that if Georgia is only looking to get a win on Saturday versus Auburn, then it's shortchanging itself. And what an incredible thing for a great former leader of a Georgia program who saw his team win an SEC championship. What a great forward-thinking thing for David to say right there, because it is true. And I have said that I think Auburn's still pretty good, despite the fact that it doesn't have the greatest record, despite the fact that it's not sporting a very high ranking, despite the fact that it's a pretty significant underdog. I think Auburn is still probably a little bit better than some people think. Imagine the statement that Georgia would make if it goes out there and puts up a big performance and wins in comfortable, fashion. I imagine how significant that becomes if Georgia's truly able to do that. I think it is a statement about how much better that Georgia's got. And it's not just about statements for David. He's also saying there that it's about showing each other, the players on the field, that where Georgia is right now is not where it wants to be come December, that it does want to keep improving, heading towards that showdown with Alabama. I think those are really interesting words from David Green. I think it's really great that he spoke those today here on DawgNation Daily.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC.
All right, we will get Stan White, the former Auburn quarterback, coming up here in just a moment. We'll talk to him about the big game on Saturday between his side, the Auburn Tigers, and the Georgia Bulldogs. Before that, though, let's dive in here to our SEC through. And, of course, here on Thursdays, we do our MyBookie Best Bets. And by now, I've been talking to you about MyBookie a lot. They're the only sports book we would trust and recommend here around DawgNation because they are known as the fast, no-hassle payout when you win. And right now, they've got an even better offer for you than that. You can get your first deposit matched up to 50%, but you got to act right now. Find MyBookie online. That's MyBookie. MyBookie. That's how you spell MyBookie. And then use the promo code DawgNation, all one word, spelled the way it's supposed to be, DAWG. When you use that promo code DawgNation, your first deposit can be matched up to 50%, but you've got to act right now. And then after that, you play, you win, you get paid. It's as simple as that with MyBookie, but you got to find them online. Use the promo code DawgNation, and you get that match on that first deposit. So really fun stuff there. I got to tell you, this is an incredibly difficult week of picks when it comes to the SEC. I think these are actually some decent games. I just think picking the winners here is very hard because at this point in time, a lot of these teams are a little bit of a mess, and many teams come in here, both sides, desperate for a win. Let me start with what I think the easiest pick on the board is. It's South Carolina at Florida. I cannot believe that Florida is still a 6-point favorite over South Carolina, given the mess that Florida appears to be in right now, tail spinning after the Georgia loss. Looked terrible last week against Missouri. And normally I kind of follow a little bit of a zigzag theory here of if you play really bad one week, you're due to play better the next week. But Florida seems to have lost its faith in quarterback Felipe Franks, and there has been almost a direct challenge from some people close to Florida to make a quarterback change for this week. But now you've got these rumors coming out of Gainesville that Kyle Trask, one of those quarterback options, may have hurt himself and may not be available on Saturday against South Carolina. So it's either stick with Franks or go to the freshman Emory Jones. Jones did play some against Georgia. But this whole thing seems like it's destined for a South Carolina team that I just think is better than Florida anyway. Getting this win against the Gamecocks, certainly keep it closer than the 6 here. I'll take the Gamecocks and won't look back. They are, for me, a MyBookie best bet. A little harder game to pick is Vanderbilt at Missouri. Missouri, if you pay attention to the stats blogs, the math guru folks, Missouri is probably one of the more underrated teams in the country as of right now. I saw where Drew Lock last week said they were the best 5-4, 4-4, whatever team they are. He said they're the best, 4-loss team in the country here. That may be true. Georgia's win at Missouri, when it happened, all of a sudden looks like a little bit better win. But 17 points may be too much against Vanderbilt. This may be an overreaction to the game against Florida last week. Obviously, I don't think Missouri loses this game. But plus 17, I'm going to take the Commodores as a MyBookie best bet. I may regret that, but for now, that's what I'm going to do. Another relatively big number for Texas A&M at home against Ole Miss. A&M lost a kind of a important game last week to Auburn, and that was a game in which Jimbo Fisher probably needed that to make fans feel good about his first year. I'm not going to get scared off of A&M just because they lost at Auburn. I probably made a very bad call a week ago when I took Ole Miss head-to-head versus South Carolina. It was kind of a pick-em scenario, kind of an even point spread. I thought that Ole Miss' ability to score points would negate the fact their defense can't stop anybody. Well, it didn't. Ole Miss is awful on defense. A&M had its issues a week ago, but Trevion Williams is still a very good running back, and I feel like this is the kind of deal where A&M may control the clock, 2 touchdowns, not that big of a deficit to overcome here. I'll take Texas A&M, despite the fact they're a pretty big favorite, 11.5 points. I will make the Aggies at home a MyBookie best bet. This feels like the kind of thing I may regret as well, but nonetheless, that's what I'm going to do. I have Mississippi State at Alabama. Mississippi State is a 24-point underdog at Alabama. This kind of stuff becomes very difficult to predict here. Alabama just keeps rolling. Dominant last week against LSU. No reason to think this will be any different. Mississippi State, the only way they keep this number close is if they design a game plan that's intentionally designed to keep the game close with the running quarterback. Maybe they go underneath the 24. For the most part, I would stay away from this game. But that's Mississippi State's one chance to keep this game close. Overall, this is probably a skip or a pass for me, not a MyBookie best bet on either side. Tennessee is at home versus Kentucky, and they are a 6-point underdog. I'm probably going to be a sucker on this one a little bit too. I just don't see how a Tennessee team that only scored 1 offensive touchdown against Charlotte moves the football at all against Kentucky. Give me the Wildcats plus 6 as a MyBookie best bet. And then, for the most part, LSU at Arkansas is a stay away for me. I could see LSU not showing up really at all there on the deflation of losing to Alabama. But for the most part, that's a stay away for me. And that is your MyBookie best bets here as a part of our SEC through. The game, though, that we care about takes place on Saturday. It's Georgia versus Auburn in Athens, a renewal of the Deep South's oldest rivalry. And a guy that knows the game very well as a former player and now current analyst for the Auburn Radio Network. He is Stan White. He joins us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. Stan, thanks for spending some time with us today. I really appreciate it. Hope you're doing well.
Hey, my pleasure, guys. Hope you're doing well.
We are, and obviously, as you might imagine, Stan, we've spent a lot of time this week talking about the importance of this game from the Georgia side here. But from an Auburn standpoint, what does this rivalry mean here in 2018? What does this game in particular mean for Auburn's 2018 season? As you talk about this with the folks there on the plains, what is the Auburn perspective on the importance of the game on Saturday?
Well, obviously Auburn is out of the race for the SEC, but this being the Deep South's oldest rivalry and it being a really exciting game last year, playing twice, first time I think in its history of playing twice in the same. It's a huge game for Auburn. They came off a big win last weekend, very ugly win, but it was still a win nonetheless. And so this is a chance for Auburn to, try to right that ship. And on offense, and of course to get their defense back that gave up a lot of rushing yards last weekend, and now they're going against the top team in rushing in the SEC. So it's going to be a big challenge for the Auburn team, but hopefully they can go in there and play well and see what happens.
Yeah, you referenced the Texas A&M game, which for a Georgia fan is a little bit weird to watch because it opens up some possibilities of what might happen on Saturday. And I guess I'll start with the Auburn offense here. We're so used to seeing the Gus Malzahn offense rack up huge rushing totals. It certainly is what happened last November when Auburn hosted Georgia. And yet on Saturday, that didn't really happen against Texas A&M. What did you make of, kind of where the Auburn offense here is at the moment in terms of establishing that identity of running the football the way that I know that Malzahn and Chip Lindsey would like to do, and, what you're doing with Jared Stidham there at the quarterback position? What is the identity of that Auburn offense right now?
Well, it's been a tough going most of the year this year. They've shown glimpses at times of really being able to control the offense and the possessions, and then at times it's just been a struggle. And Gus Malzahn is known as a run first, play action pass oriented offensive philosophy type coach, and Chip Lindsey's much the same. But this is a year that their rushing game has not been up to par, and as it showed last week, 19 rushing yards. In fact, I think toward halftime, I mentioned to my broadcast partner, Rod Bramlett, off the air, I said, watch us have about 2 yards rushing and win this game. And sure enough, it wasn't that far off. They had 19 rushing yards on the game, and that, of course, includes back yards and everything. But, yeah, at the end of that game, I think Auburn will probably go back and look at film, and I'm sure they have already, about what, are some glimpses of things that they've done well. And what Auburn did well at the end of that game, they basically went into a 2-minute mode, and they had to throw the ball, and they had 2 fantastic drives that went right down the field to win that game. And so that's what you got to take from that is in a positive, respect, because, they were kind of left for dead and down by 10 with 7 minutes to go. And so they just kind of shelved it all and went into 2-minute mode, and sure enough, it worked.
You mentioned the Auburn defensive front had some issues against the run last Saturday. That doesn't change my overall opinion of that group. I still think that's a very good front seven. And, Stan, as you know, for a lot of Georgia fans, it's still kind of tough to take that there's so many, impactful Georgians that play on that defensive line. Derek Brown, Dontavius Russell. There are a lot of guys that Georgia certainly targeted and at one point in time maybe thought it would get that are having pretty good careers here for Auburn. And that becomes one of the key storylines in this game on Saturday, not just because the Auburn defensive front's going to try to stop this Georgia rushing attack, but because, once again, these two programs, Georgia and Auburn, remain just, I don't want to say bitter recruiting rivals, but certainly intense recruiting rivals.
Oh, there's no question. And I remember when I went to Auburn, that was there were, a few more Alabama natives on that team, but it was clearly a close second with Auburn players. And it was kind of a mutual understanding that, look, Georgia, we're going to go out there and play well against Georgia and try to win that game. And then they kind of repaid the favor to us with the Iron Bowl after that. So, and you mentioned a couple. Derek Brown, just a fantastic player from Sugar Hill, Georgia, and there's several others that are from the state of Georgia on that roster. So I know it's a big game for them, be a big weekend for them. Probably see a lot of people they haven't seen in a while. A lot of family members probably be at that game. So it's huge. And you mentioned, Auburn's defensive front. They didn't have as good a performance as they'd liked last weekend against Travion Williams and the Texas A&M rush offense. But this is still a very, very good bunch. I look for them to try to get that corrected and maintain their gap integrities. And when you got a guy like Swift and Holyfield, you've got to be very disciplined with your rush and you got to be able to clog holes, because you let those guys get to the second and third rounds, you're talking about turning a 10-yard gain into a 30-yard gain.
This week, the Auburn Athletic Director, Alan Green, came out and voiced some support for Coach Gus Malzahn. Is that the kind of thing that you thought needed to happen? And if it did need to happen, how have the fans responded to what Green had to say?
I'm not sure. I think over here in the state of Alabama, there's just been Alan Green's been asked so much about it, and I'm sure Gus at times has been asked about it as well. And so I think he just kind of had gotten to the point where he wanted to just put it all to rest and focus on the remainder of this year. And so I think more so he had just been asked about it at every single function that he was doing. And finally, I think he just got to the point that, listen, we're supporting our coach. He's had a history of going through a few rough spots, and he's dug his way out. And last year was an example of that, of beating the two number one teams in a 3-week period, and going and winning the SEC West and within one quarter of actually playing in the playoffs, and Georgia pulled away at the end. So, I think that was more so he just wanted to address it, get it out of the way, and say, look, guys, quit asking me the question. I mean, this is the way it's going to be, and I think Auburn fans by and by, they expected this year and to be a situation where they're going into November competing for the West, much like last year, and rightfully so. I mean, they had a lot of good returners coming back in key positions, and unfortunately, that middle stretch of the year, the loss to LSU, and then really the loss to State, Tennessee, were the disappointing portions of it. But they realized that they can right the ship somewhat and go out there and play well in Athens and see if you can get a win there and kind of spoil some others, if that's so to speak. But certainly, Auburn expects to compete for championships and be in Atlanta. Not every year. I don't think anybody would expect that every year, except for the team across the state over here in Alabama. But that's one where they just want to compete every year, and I think Auburn expects that.
Let me finish up with this, if you don't mind. There has been a lot of talk, seemingly this week, but also back in the summer as well, about some potential changes to the Georgia-Auburn rivalry. It seemed like both coaches, Malzahn and Kirby both, might like to flip-flop the home-away rotation. We're also hearing that Auburn, maybe Alan Green here, wants to move the game earlier in the season to put some distance between that game and the other rivalry game that Auburn plays against Alabama. How much do Auburn people talk about that, on a daily basis? We hear about that this week because the two teams are about to play again. Is this a pretty frequent, topic of conversation here, making some changes to that rivalry?
Absolutely. It is absolutely. Imagine any other programs playing, in a 2 or 3 week period against two top 5 teams on the road, or like last year at home. That's just, and when I was playing, it was flip flopped. I guess what happened when A&M and Missouri joined the league 4, 5, 6 years ago, they did that. Where actually I think Georgia came to Jordan-Hare twice, back to back, and that's what forced that. And so, I think if anything, they have to consider going back to, when Auburn plays Georgia away, they have Alabama at home. I mean, that's just ludicrous to play two year in and year out top 5 teams on the road at the end of the year. That's crazy. And then, it always was when I was playing. We had Tennessee and Florida on the schedule as well, so it was we always had Florida, Georgia, and then Alabama at the end of the year, which was pretty tough to do. But I can understand wanting to spread that out a little bit. And I'm Georgia always had their Georgia Tech game at the end of their year, and which is it's a state rivalry. It's not a conference rivalry, but a state rivalry, and a big one for them. So I can see where Alan Green and the administration wants to try to separate those two, but at very least, it needs to be rectified where the Auburn in Alabama and Auburn in Georgia series is not a home every year and an away. That's too much.
Stan, that's really interesting stuff. We appreciate you taking some time to talk to us about the game on Saturday. Hope Athens treats you well this weekend, and we'll look forward to speaking to you here pretty soon.
Hey, my pleasure, guys. Take care now.
Nice to be able to chat with Alan Green. We talked about Alan Green. That's Stan White, the former Auburn quarterback and Auburn color analyst, joining us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. Really appreciate him being here. And I thought his comments there at the end about the Georgia-Auburn scheduling issue, I thought they were very interesting. He says, at the very least, let's flip-flop this thing so Auburn's not playing at home every year against both Georgia and Alabama, and then on the road in every other year, kind of the same way. And from that standpoint, I think for the most part, Georgia fans kind of agree with that, or at least they don't mind that. Kirby Smart has said he'd like to see that changed as well because it's also, a little bit more balanced for the Georgia schedule too. A couple things I'd point out, though. Georgia's not the only potential dance partner for Auburn here. How about you go see if Alabama wants to cooperate and help you out a little bit? So that's something to think about. By the way, 740 days it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. It's our Gator Hater Updater. We'll see you tomorrow here on DawgNation Daily. And on video, good to have you with us here today. We will dive in and get as many of these comments as we can from you. Let's hit some Facebook and some YouTube stuff. I thought Stan White had some great stuff to say, and I thought that David Green, as always, per usual, was excellent here on this Thursday. Miriam Martin Corbin on the subject of scheduling says it isn't too much for Georgia. There's no way to know who's going to be great every year. I also got a really good tweet about this too, Miriam. Somebody tweeted me yesterday and said, Georgia's won. What was it Jeff told us? Is it 10 out of the last 13? Something along those lines. Georgia's had quite the winning run against Georgia here as of late. That maybe Georgia, just because of the success it's had, is going to be very slow to want to make any change to that Georgia-Auburn rivalry. I do think it is Georgia's prerogative if it wants to just kind of be obstinate and play hardball and something like this. I do think it has a right to do that. I don't think that Georgia has to always just cooperate just because a dance partner within the SEC has asked them to do that. But I think that's it's certainly a very interesting topic, and I appreciate Stan White diving in here and talking to us about it. Mike Mazzell says, B.A., what's your prediction? Y'all don't really like my prediction too well for this one. I don't make you angry too much, but this weekend I think maybe I've upset some of you. I like Georgia here somewhere in the neighborhood of, 31-23, 27-20, something along those lines. I like Georgia by about a touchdown here, a little closer than some of you might think. Brett Oglesby says, B.A., do you know the details of David Marshall's foot injury? So, Brett, I'm probably the worst injury guy in the world. I just, I'm not great with small details sometimes, and sometimes the small details of injuries I know so I don't know the nature and why Marshall's injuries lingered so much. But once again, he's still not playing. Kirby Smart said that this week, so he's still not playing. I do know that much, but in terms of why it's hampered him as much as it has, I'm just not great at that kind of stuff, and I apologize. But the important thing here is I just wouldn't think about Marshall being a big part of this thing. Certainly not on Saturday, and maybe not much more. So we'll have to see. Miriam Martin Corbin says she thinks that Georgia's going to score more than 31. We will see. Drew Roman says Auburn's not scoring much more than 14. I think that it's important to remember that this is still an Auburn program that has some weapons. And I will, restate what I said yesterday, or I've said a couple times this week. I look at Georgia versus Florida and say, that's not going to be that big of a deal. And most people thought that, well, I'm just biased. I got the red G on, or the black G with the red shirt on. I got the Gator hater squirrel over here. I've got all this stuff that shows that I'm a total partisan. Therefore, I'm incapable of being objective when it comes to Georgia, Florida. But the truth is, from my perspective, I was basing all that on numbers. That there will be a time, maybe in the future, where Florida's a threat to Georgia. But as long as they've got Johnny 3-star at every position, the likelihood of that's just not going to happen. Auburn, though, is a little bit different creature. Auburn does have a lot of players that Georgia wanted. And, that usually works its way out to the tune of a little tougher team to beat. I think there's a gravitational pull over the course of a season. If you start off the year at preseason number 8, and then you lose a couple times, I believe over the course of a season, as long as it goes on, you start to move back towards where you were thought to be before the season began. You may not get all the way back there. You're probably not going to, but you move in that direction over the course of a season. The opposite is true if you are thought to be an unranked team at the beginning of the year. You work your way up to number 9. Over the course of the year, I think you have a tendency to work your way back to where the preseason expectation was, and that's happening with Florida now. I would suggest for Auburn, the opposite's going to occur. I think they're going to play pretty well, not just against Georgia, but maybe against Alabama as well. Not going to win either one of those games probably, but they are still a tough out. For those of you that follow professional wrestling, the one thing I've always said for like the last year is that Auburn is like the intercontinental champion of the SEC. Georgia and Alabama are clearly the main event guys. They're the ones that are fighting for the world championship. But the best of the rest, the champion of the mid-card, is still Auburn. And yes, I know LSU beat Auburn earlier in the season, but the fact of the matter is I still think that Auburn's the best of the rest. And from that standpoint, there's a little bit of a challenge, associated with facing them. Let me get a couple comments here on Facebook, then I'll go over to YouTube. Dustin Williams says, I'm excited to watch this game and see the young guys step up again and see we keep improving like the past 2 games. This is a great opportunity for the Dogs to keep the momentum going and keep growing and improving. Yeah, Dustin, I totally agree. So this is one of those things where if I'm wrong and Georgia wins 37-10, well, y'all know what that means at that point in time. What that means is that this battle station is fully operational. Jeff likes the Star Wars analogies. He knows I'm a Star Wars fan, so he kind of tosses some of those my way from time to time. Well, that's a Star Wars analogy we can use here. That battle station's fully operational if Georgia takes this team to the woodshed on Saturday. 93,000 people, raucous environment, raucous crowd. That's going to be pretty fun to see. But my guess is the more realistic assessment is that the process of being good enough to compete with Alabama, which I do believe will happen, I believe that process is still ongoing, and you may have some examples of that on Saturday because you'll have young players playing, and they're going to pop and they're going to flash. But this is still an Auburn team that wants to spread you out wide and then attack you deep. And don't be surprised if those young linebackers are put into a tough situation when they're on the field because they're going to be in one-on-one situations. For those of you like the movie Rounders, that idea about being forced into a decision for all your chips. I mean, a lot of times, in playing Auburn's a little bit like that, where you are in a one-on-one situation, you got no help, you got to go all in, try to make the tackle, and if you don't, it's going to be a disaster. Auburn's offense can still do a pretty good job of kind of getting you in that situation. Cliff Payne, who is an Auburn fan, by the way, in our YouTube comment section, says that Jake Fromm will have a field day this week. Auburn's back end is not very good. That's obviously comforting, I think, Cliff, for some Georgia fans. You still got to block that front seven to get there. And ultimately, I do think Fromm has a pretty good day on Saturday. And what Cliff brings up is one of the reasons why I ultimately think that Georgia wins the game. But I don't know it's going to be quite as easy as that. Diedrich Frazier, upping the ante on my wrestling reference, says that Auburn is Tito Santana. Good, but not championship material. I just love the fact that we're comparing Auburn to Tito Santana. I love that. Cliff Payne says not an Auburn fan. Excuse me, Cliff. I apologize. I totally apologize for that, Cliff. There's somebody that comes in here from time to time that does have the last name Payne that's an Auburn fan. So, Cliff, I apologize for that. Jermaine Dunbar Trucking says, BA, you sound like you have doubts this weekend. I really don't. I mean, I know this sounds weird to say that, I'm confident about a game that I think is going to be close because close things, weird things can happen in close games. But, I mean, more than anything, I feel good about the growth that Georgia's shown over the last couple of weeks. I just think that Auburn's better than Kentucky or Florida. So that's what I believe. Now, I'm also wrong all the time. So you can, you can chalk this up with a grain of salt, I guess. But to a certain extent, I just believe that I know Auburn to be a more formidable foe than Kentucky or Florida, and I think that Georgia will rise to that challenge. But Georgia's going to need that crowd. They're going to need the 93,000 people. They're going to need what looks to be the emergence of this tandem at running back between DeAndre Swift and Elijah Holyfield. They're going to need these freshmen on defense. They're going to need it all on Saturday, I believe. Eric Smith says John Emery Jr. coming back. I don't know about that, Eric. I don't have a good feeling about that. I mean, my thought on that is, Jeff had the report at DawgNation.com about Noah Cain. It seems like right now, if Georgia's going to get that elite back for the 2019 class, that Noah Cain seems to be a lot more likely to be that than John Emery Jr. Drew Eist says, I honestly think Georgia has a good chance to beat Alabama on a neutral field. Yeah, I am not the least bit afraid of Alabama. They may beat Georgia. They may be a 14-point favorite. They may cover that number. That may all happen. I am not the least bit afraid. I'm just not. And I don't think the Georgia fans should be either. Now, if Georgia played Alabama in September, Georgia would probably lost by 24 points. And if they played them in October, it would probably been about the same kind of deal. But that's not what this thing is anymore. This is getting to be, a little later in the year, and some young pups are growing up pretty quick here. And David Green talked earlier about how that kind of thing can happen. Daniel Aldrich also asked about Ben Cleveland. Cleveland, I guess I'm fairly optimistic on, and Georgia needs him. I think the Georgia running game looked pretty good last week with a banged-up offensive line, but over the course of a year, especially against Derek Brown and, Russell and those guys, you want to have your all-hands-on-deck situation. So I have a fairly optimistic assessment for Cleveland on Saturday. Matt Rukavina calls him the Mountain, Ben the Mountain Cleveland coming back. That's a great nickname. I don't know if that's the official sanction nickname or not, but that's a good nickname. All right, let me get a fun comment here because I do love this kind of stuff. Luke Bird asked, I want to know, how does Bama get in the playoff if we beat them over Michigan, if they win out and are champion? How does Bama get a free pass in? So I think this is a really interesting conversation because really you've got both scenarios at play here. And I saw where, I believe it was Trevor Maddich, who is one of those ESPN college football analyst guys, who said yesterday, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I believe I'm right about this. All this stuff goes in one ear and out the other. I believe that Maddich said that if Georgia won the SEC, that Alabama would get in the playoff over Michigan. Connor Riley, do you think that would happen? You do. I don't. You think that what would it be 12-1 Alabama would get in over Big Ten champion Michigan? I don't think it would. I don't think it would. Yeah. I don't even want to hear about that. I don't even want to hear. Listen, I'm going to write about this at some point in time. I think there are a lot of playoff scenarios that are out there. I think that Michigan would probably get the nod over Alabama simply because Michigan hasn't been in the playoff. It's a gigantic fan base. If they're the one-loss Big Ten champion, the only team they lost to was at Notre Dame, I think there would be, a little bit of national distaste about Alabama getting in for the exact same reason that our commenter Luke mentioned a moment ago. I believe his name was Luke. Luke Bird, who says it's a free pass for Alabama. If Luke Bird down here in the heart of SEC country is calling it a free pass, what do you think they're calling it in Detroit, in Chicago, and Indianapolis, and places like that? There'd be a little bit of a distaste for Alabama there. The interesting thing would be is, what if it's Ohio State that beats Michigan? They're the Big Ten champion, and they've got this bad loss to Purdue on their resume. Alabama's only loss is a razor-thin loss to Georgia in the SEC championship, who's the number 2 or 3 team in the country at that point in time. Is there a chance the committee would then take Alabama over Ohio State again, facing the same situation as it was a year ago, with Alabama not being SEC champion and Ohio State being Big Ten champion? I think that's also an interesting scenario. Now, what Connor Riley was stirring the pot with a minute ago is, don't be so sure that Georgia's not in trouble there in that regard. Hopefully, to goodness, that's not the scenario. But there are a few weird possible playoff scenarios that I think are a legitimate possibility, just because the likelihood of all these teams winning out the way it seems like they're supposed to is just not all that likely. So I think that right now all this seems really easy and clean, but this kind of stuff has a way of not quite working out that way, and that's one of the reasons why we're going to follow it so closely here. When these ridiculous arguments start popping up, you better believe we're going to call them for what they are. Rob W. says, what if they pass Notre Dame instead of Michigan? I just believe there's no chance that that an unbeaten Notre Dame misses the playoff. I don't think there's any way it happens. Jamie West says Ohio State is fake news. And here's what I think is really interesting. This is one of those deals, and fake news kind of like a political term. Here's one of those deals where, like, the Alabama-Ohio State thing is almost just like politics. Y'all know we don't talk about politics here. But you know the way that, like, politics, there's, like, no agreement, and, like, the two sides don't even see the world the same way? To me, it's so amazing the way that the college football thing is very, very similar. Where, like, the Ohio State people, and to a certain extent I think the Big Ten people, even beyond the Ohio State fan base, looks at what happened in Alabama last year and says, how did that team get a free pass in the playoff? And then the people down here, even the non-Alabama fans, kind of look at Ohio State and say, that's the most overrated team in the world. They got beat by Iowa, bad. They lost big time by to Purdue. That he calls them fake news. That's what a lot of people around here kind of think. It's really amazing how the kind of southern view of Ohio State, the Midwestern view of Alabama, is to a certain extent like politics. It's pretty fascinating to me. Cliff Payne says that Michigan doesn't control its destiny because of Notre Dame. That is probably partially true, although you better believe if Michigan gets held out of the playoff because it lost Notre Dame, they're going to raise holy hell. And to a certain extent, I kind of understand where they're coming from on that. Because what they're going to say is, you cannot punish us for playing at Notre Dame. In other words, team that doesn't play really tough non-conference road game. If they were undefeated, you just cakewalk them right into the playoff here. You can't punish us for playing that game. You want to reward teams for playing that. I'm no Michigan fan, but to a certain extent, that's actually not an unreasonable argument that you've got a grade on the curve here when, Alabama's playing Louisville in Orlando or wherever the game was played. It was a neutral site game. And Michigan's playing at Notre Dame. I mean, you do have to give Michigan a little bit of credit for going into a tough environment like that, much like Georgia did a year ago and will do again soon. I think in that standpoint, I'm no Harbaugh fan. I'm no Michigan fan. I can't stand the Big Ten for the most part. But that would be a somewhat reasonable argument, I think. Jay Parker on YouTube says, think of it this way. Other 3 playoff teams would prefer Michigan over Alabama. Thus, Bama's the right choice. I don't know that that's the way that the committee thinks about it, but I do think that's a really interesting point. That, Alabama's a 2-touchdown favorite over virtually everybody. It may only be about a 9 or 10-point favorite over Clemson, but it's a big favorite against everybody in the country. And Michigan, for the most part, is not. Michigan being an underdog to Georgia slightly, fairly significant underdog to Clemson, huge underdog to Alabama. From that standpoint, that's true. However, if you follow the commenter's logic and say you put Alabama in because it would be a big favorite over everybody else, it then becomes easy to start putting the other teams in the playoff based on who would give Alabama the biggest challenge. For instance, if I'm just doing my own, guessing here, I think of Notre Dame and Michigan as being 2 of the at least 5 or 6 best teams in the country. The top 4 I'll reserve judgment on, but I think that Michigan and Notre Dame are 2 of the 5 or 6 best teams in the country. For instance, I think they are both better than Oklahoma. However, if you told me I got to book a game in which Alabama has a chance of losing, I would put Oklahoma versus Alabama more so than Notre Dame or Michigan for a chance to beat the Crimson Tide. So I think it's an interesting point to say Alabama deserves the playoff because the other teams would be more afraid to play them. But from that same logic, you start saying, who is Alabama afraid to play? And of the national playoff contenders, I think Oklahoma, because of Kyler Murray, is probably a little more dangerous than Michigan or Notre Dame would be. But that's a really interesting point, though. Say it again, Connor. Oh, so Connor Riley thinks that Michigan is the team that could best beat Alabama. Certainly, Shea Patterson can be the kind of quarterback that's given Alabama some trouble in the past. But that's a really interesting point. Kristen Phillips says Notre Dame's going to get blown out again in the college football playoff if they make it. That's obviously a reference back to 2012 when Notre Dame had no business being in the game. I'm not even sure Manti Te'o could have started for Alabama, and maybe not could have started for Georgia. That was an overrated team. I don't know that this Notre Dame team is overrated like that. But it's an interesting point. This is a great point from K9 Blues, changing the subject here, because I could talk playoffs all day long. But K9 brings up a really good point. BA, any word on if the crowd in Athens plans payback and to prove that Between the Hedges is at least as hard as Auburn? I think it's a really good point from K9 Blues that, there's been a lot of talk about the potential blackout this week. And I said earlier that I don't believe that the crowd needs a blackout to be intense on Saturday. My belief in Georgia fans is they are going to create an incredible environment this Saturday. But as K9 Blues points out, it ought to be taken as a real source of motivation that Auburn's crowd did a lot to win that game for Auburn a year ago. And Georgia got its payback in the SEC championship. We know how that story finally ended. But there's no doubt. I mean, I was there, folks. Auburn students and fans did a great job that day. And, this is a night game. It's going to be a little cold. Nakobe Dean's going to be there. We played the audio from him on Before the Hedges yesterday. Like, he specifically said he's coming because he wants to see how crazy it's going to be. I mean, what else do you need to just get wild? I just feel like it's going to be an awesome, awesome atmosphere. And I've said on here this week, I know Connor Riley's written about this as well, you got to crank Soulja Boy when it's over. That's going to be the victory cigar moment in this game. Hip-hop song from 2007 that half the people in the crowd have never even heard before. But I feel like you got to do that. And I'm no expert on hip-hop, but this is a song I want played on Saturday. And I just think that I think it's got to be It's got to be everything that night games in the SEC with two bitter rivals is supposed to be about. That's what it's got to be. Got to be. Trey Epps says, it may have been a good crowd last year, but Auburn can't win big games away from Jordan-Hare Stadium. Trey's probably right about that. Georgia, on the other hand, has been better away from home, but that doesn't mean that I still don't want to make home quite a place to be. Plus, if nothing else, Georgia has not played a home game since David Green was playing. I mean, the last Georgia home game, I was like, 50 pounds lighter and had a lot more brown hair on my head instead of this balding gray stuff. So, I mean, if nothing else, it's just been a long time for Georgia fans. You ought to want to enjoy that. Chris Brandon says DJ Brandon over here. Yeah. I don't know that people normally turn to me for advice on hip-hop music. In this place, Soulja Boy Superman has got to be cranked on Saturday. I know a lot of folk in Athens are watching this right now, and I hope somebody will take me up on that because I think the entire crowd would love that, especially the ones who saw Auburn playing that thing last year. All right, let me get ready to get out of here. We are going to take a couple more comments. Crow King 123 says UGA fans are going to be hungry. Yeah, I think they probably will be. I mean, listen, I think one of the cool things that's happened over the last few years is how intense Sanford Stadium has gotten. I don't know that Sanford Stadium was always a really loud, wild, crazy stadium. I don't really know why it wasn't, but I don't really know that it always was. I think for its big games now, though, Sanford Stadium is just as wild and crazy as anything is. Now, I remember back in 2004, Georgia played LSU, the defending national champion, and it was the year before that Georgia had gone to Baton Rouge and faced a really intense crowd, and they probably had an impact on the game. And I do think there was a motivation there in 2004 to return that favor. And at the time, the 2004 LSU game was the loudest game I'd ever been to. That mean on the field during the fourth quarter, the ground was shaking. You could just feel it. And I think there's a similar thing in play here on Saturday where, Georgia fans want to show that, they're capable of creating the same kind of atmosphere that Auburn's kind of famous for doing, and LSU's famous for doing, and some of the other fan bases are famous for doing. And right now, this is the kind of team that deserves that kind of noise. Georgia's turned itself into a pretty good season here, and it's got a big game coming up with Alabama in December, but there is work to be done against Auburn. First of all, because it's a rivalry, and you just want to win the Deep South's oldest rivalry again. You love the idea of sending Malzahn into more of a tailspin with his own fans there. That's just fun to think about. And this is about playoff positioning for Georgia. A win in the SEC minus a loss to Auburn probably doesn't get you where you want to go. So to make the SEC championship game matter as much as you want it to, you got to win this game for the purposes of resume. And as David Green pointed out, it's also about more than just winning. It's about continuing to take those steps of improvement towards actually being the kind of team that can be a real factor against the Crimson Tide. Not the team that runs and hides in the corner and wishes it could have played somebody else, but the team that stares Alabama in the eye and takes everything that the Crimson Tide can throw at them. That is a fun thing to think about. And we got another big show for us coming up on Friday to get ready for that. One of the things we will talk about tomorrow, too, is the way that recruiting is going to be impacted by what happens tomorrow. It is a gigantic visitors list. Elite guys like Nakobe Dean taking an official visit. This is big stuff. Jeff's done a great job of helping us preview that, so we'll talk to him more about that tomorrow. I'll also tell you what Kirby Smart said about that in that regard, and we'll get some more thoughts about Georgia-Auburn on Saturday and why this is such a pivotal game for the Bulldogs. What a great week. I mean, what else would you want to be doing other than talking about college football like this? Thank you all for being a part of it. Thanks for allowing me to be a part of this conversation with you. We'll have DN90 coming up later on the day, more news from around Dog Nation, and back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for another episode of DawgNation Daily Live, presented by Marco's Pizza. Y'all have a great day.